Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Fangxiao, a Chinese phishing threat actor, the one we've been investigating for the last, God knows. So first of all, who are we? Who am I? My name is Alana Witten. I am a professional Googler. I whack things into a search engine and I hope for the best. I'm a bug bounty hunter and I'm a cyber threat intelligence analyst at Cyjax. I have a Twitter account. Go follow me.
And my name is Emily Dennison. I am a professional button pusher. I am also a threat intelligence analyst at Cyjax. And you can find me on Twitter and on Mastodon, which is where I'm told all the cool kids are these days.
So, first of all, Fangxiao are a phishing threat actor. They own over 42,000 domains. And the whole point of the scam is they will filter for high-value clicks. Once they do that, they will then convince you to spread the campaign. So it acts as kind of like a self-propagating worm. And then lastly, it will funnel you into one domain called getprize.club, which is then used to serve payloads. So imagine one day you're doing whatever you're doing, and you get a text like this one on WhatsApp, on Facebook Messenger, on anything. And there's no context, there's no nothing, it's just that. But it's from a friend or a contact or a trusted source. And you think, I'm bored, I'm curious, I'll click it. Next slide, please. Some weird stuff happens with the URL. You don't really notice who looks at the URL. Some redirects happen, and then suddenly you see this, and you think, yeah, it's a scam. Congratulations, fake reviews, kind of very, very pointless. It's very obvious. And that's great, you click off and carry on with your day, but they're not really after you. They're kind of after people who are a bit more technologically inept, a bit more vulnerable, and people who see a brand they like and think, yeah, I'll trust that. And when Fangxiao impersonates over 400 global brands, there's probably something for everyone. Next in the scam, you ask some benign questions. They're irrelevant, the data is not recorded. And then you are sent to this page where and then you're offered a brand-specific prize or just money. And then in order to redeem your prize, you must spread the campaign to your contacts, hence the cycle. What am I getting from here? Yep, and you are finally rewarded by being sent to the domain I mentioned earlier, which is then used to serve payloads. So what do we want from this? Earlier, I mentioned that when you go to a domain, you're redirected. You're actually redirected to more and more domains. So they kind of seem endless. Whenever you do it, it's more and more and more and more. But we kind of wanted to know, can we draw some borders on this? How many domains do they actually own? And can we kind of put a hard limit on it? Next, attribution. Going from a domains to a docs is going to be difficult, but how much can we actually figure out about the group themselves and the people behind them? And lastly, what's actually the point of this? This isn't some guy in a hoodie in a basement. It's ran as a collective that's demonstrated consideration towards costs, profits, logistics and scaling, risk management and contingencies. But at the end of the day, why go through all the trouble? So before we answer those questions, I think it might be useful to just give you some context as to kind of their infrastructure. So I mentioned they have 42,000 domains. The prevalent scheme for domains is the one on the screen. It's one word followed by another word followed by a top-level domain. They have a back-end dictionary which they pull from. And the great thing about it is because it's such a scale, it's all automated and they don't really check domains. So here's an example. But for example, because it's automated, they don't really check them. So we have a generally propaganda at top, which is always nice. They're honest, at least. Another one, extraordinary trick. And lastly, my favorite, genuinetrap.top. If you're sent a link called genuine trap and you fall for a trap that is genuine, I think that might be on you. Next, we have two types of links, join links and end links. So I mentioned earlier they have the redirection chain. It's very important. You cannot skip this redirection chain. You have to join via join link and you cannot join on an end link. If you do, you'll just get an error. So they're made up of the following. You have your domain followed by your brand ID, parameter, and a tracking value. The brand ID is irregular, which is annoying for when I want to do analysis and scraping. It's usually kind of the name of the brand abbreviated heavily plus some obfuscated stuff to make it annoying. followed by parameter, which is usually just a couple of letters, and then a tracking value, which is epoch time plus some characters. The tracking value is used A for tracking and B for, they don't want you reusing the same links, just for making it harder for analysis. So if you use the same link with the same epoch time, it just errors out. The next is n links. They're very similar to the join links. However, they have a random string, which just makes obfuscation and are not fun to analyze. Obviously, one more back. And the reason they have this is because here, they will host like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of campaigns on this, but change it with that your random string. I think next thing is through de-anonymization methods. We found out that they were using contour VPS, and I think this is just like an interesting tidbit that kind of reflects how they're kind of very cost-oriented and how they're more of a reflection of a business. This is just at the moment the best price for kind of resources VPS you can get. We know they have a couple of them. We don't really know how many. We think it's a few though.
Okay, so let's talk payloads. So you go through the thing, you share it to your friends, you get some angry text saying, have you been hacked, etc., etc. And then when that's all done, you might remember there was a big red button titled continue. So where does that take you? What's the point of all of this? So this redirects you to an endpoint on normally the same server. You see it here, it's the ads or the web parameter in this JavaScript file. This JavaScript file is called uming.js. Remember that, it will come up later. So at the start of this investigation, this endpoint, the /bell/index.php endpoint redirected to a site called getprize.club. That went through a bunch of further redirects to sort of wherever you'd end up. As a small sample of some of the payloads we saw, for example, the triad Android malware. You can see the redirect chain here. This was actually served through malvertising on an ad network called Yilix, which is owned by a company called Advertica. That will also come up later. Another thing that we saw was an adware Android cleaner app. So developed by a company called Locomind, and you click through and you get a notification saying, you have 11 million viruses, download this app, it will fix everything. And no surprises, it doesn't fix anything, but having done some dynamic and static analysis of it, it has at least a dozen different tracking and advertising SDKs in it, and you can't click, you can't do anything without at least one or two ads popping up. So I mentioned a site called getprize.club. Every time you got redirected through getprize.club, the lights are going off. That is dark. Okay, every time you get redirected through and they're back. Every time you get redirected through getprize club, there was the same parameter, the U parameter. And so we thought, what if you change a 0 to a 1? Why not? That'd be fun. And of course, it reveals an entirely new campaign. So the first thing we need to point out here is we can't say for sure that this is Fangxiao. We can't say for sure that getprize.club is owned or controlled by Fangxiao, but there are significant similarities. What you see here is what we called Love Me, but it was a bunch of fake dating sites under different branding with the same sort of four questions thing that redirected through and promised, to find true love or great casual sex or, whatever. And surprisingly, you did not find that from this. So you get redirected through a bunch of stuff and you end up at a bunch of fake dating sites, which are run by a series of shell companies in Cyprus, Bulgaria, Jamaica. They're all, registered at lawyers' offices and the kinds of places where you can pay them a bit of money for digital marketing agencies and end up having, a company in a jurisdiction which has dodgy records, no online records, and it's hard to find information about them. And again, no surprise what these are for. Put in your credit card details for age verification. You go on Google reviews, everyone's complaining they're being charged and they can't, get their money back or contact anyone. So we concluded that it's highly likely that Fangxiao are profit motivated. That what you see after clicking that thing is they're selling stuff to the highest bidder. They're going through advertising networks. They're basically using this as a lead generation scam to try and, get as much money from advertising. So we thought, let's continue to investigate. Let's keep going. And then I wake up one morning and open my laptop and see some rather panicked messages because getprize.club has gone down. So we're screwed, right? Wrong. For those of you who aren't familiar with Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics, it's a tracking thing. It lets website owners basically see how their website's performing, how many people are visiting, and each campaign has a unique tag you can see here. Interestingly, Fangxiao reused these tags across sites. Sorry, I'm getting very close and far from the microphone. So we can use this tag ID to correlate across sites and find all of the sites that are controlled by Fangxiao using the same tag. So, OPSEC tip number 1 for cybercriminals, don't reuse Google tags. We pivoted across something called URL-scan. For those of you who aren't familiar with URL-scan, it's basically a web service where you can scan a website. It will log all of the requests or the assets it calls out to. So if, for example, it has a script which has this parameter, you can filter across the entire URL-scan database and find every website that calls out to this tag or that has this parameter. So Fangxiao often used 2 or 3 Google tags on one site. Again, I'm not entirely sure why they did this, but this gave us a place to really, get our teeth into it. So we could, pivot on these, but most tags were only reused a couple of times. So we ended up writing a little basic self-propagating spider. You'd give it a website or a URL scan result. It would download the HTML, basically regex out all of the Google tags, then search URL scan for all of the sites with that Google tag, and basically expand each time, download again, and expand. This worked fine, but it did have a couple of problems. The first problem is the data is quite granular. When you're dealing with tens of thousands of domains, and most Google tags are reused across 1 or 2 domains, you're not going to see the visibility you want to see. And the second issue is obviously it's quite slow because of the API rate limits. And also, if for whatever reason you pick up an unlucky start tag, you might never end up with one of the tags that's used frequently. For example, this tag here, which showed up like 10,000 times for some reason. So this was good. And we thought URL scan is a valuable source of data. What else can we do here? So this is Yuming.js, that file I mentioned earlier. And pretty much all the Fangxiao sites we found called out to Yuming.js. And Yuming.js is a very unique name. We couldn't find any other sites on the internet, or at least on Euroscan, we did a bunch of OSINT and search engine talking as well, that called out to Yuming.js. So if you just filter on that, you could find pretty much every Fangxiao site that had been, that was already known of. So we used this to find, for example, the first site that used Yuming.js, so this iteration of the campaign, the scam, appeared in 2019. The structure changed over time. For example, they tried gamification. They tried having a fake slot machine you pull to get your reward, and you always win eventually, but you might lose once or twice to really, want to get you hooked. And so you remember those things that I was saying. You will be tested on this later. You'll remember this. They're important because we managed to find a bunch of links between the developer of the adware app and the fake dating sites. So, getprize.club, which redirects to that fake data, not that fake dating site, the app. The app is developed by Locomind. This is hosted on an IP address which has these sites hosted on it as well. And as you can see, I'll move out the way so you can actually see, these sites on the same IP as Locomind redirect to sites that getprize.club also redirects to. So what we've got here is shared redirects, historic redirects. This is mainly archive data. Basically showing there is a link between the app developer and the fake dating sites. Again, this isn't enough evidence to say for sure that they're Fangxiao, but it's really interesting to point out that, there is a link between at least 2 of the payloads. Okay, so another form of OSINT and analysis we did is certificate OSINT. For those of you who aren't familiar with TLS certificates, they're obviously, the thing that gives you a little green padlock in your bar, and they have a bunch of metadata in them. One of the most important bits is the not before thing. This is basically the certificate issuing time. It's used that certificates are only valid for a few months so that they can be revoked, etc. And usually this maps up pretty neatly with when the certificate was issued. So we scraped about 6,000, give or take, certificates from known Fangxiao sites. We put it into pandas data frame, normalized the data. Something interesting to note here is that you notice obviously they're just date-time objects. Let's encrypt backdates the issued by time by an hour to avoid issues with clock skew or devices that are running a couple of minutes behind that would give you a terrifying TLS issue otherwise, the big red thing saying something is wrong here. So if you're doing something like this, look up your certificate issuer and look up what kind of backdating, what kind of stuff they do to avoid that clock skew issue, because it will affect your results. Then what we did is we heat mapped the registrations using Seaborn and some incredibly messy code that I will not be sharing here. And you can see here inside the nice red box, 9 a.m. till about 10 p.m. China Standard Time. So this is further evidence again that, you're likely dealing with a Chinese threat actor here. And it's interesting that especially, throughout the night, you've got almost no activity whatsoever. Again, further evidence that this is China.
Okay, so one day I was like, let's do a port scan, and I tried to do that, and then I ran into my best friend, Cloudflare. So the problem with, I haven't told you, is their entire infrastructure is behind Cloudflare. It makes it incredibly annoying. So the question then becomes, how do you bypass Cloudflare? And the answer to that one is you don't, because it's Cloudflare. But we don't really need to bypass Cloudflare. We just need to bypass our implementation of Cloudflare. So Fangxiao are not this kind of monolithic, perfect entity that's always existed. They've improved over time. So all we need to do, in theory, is go back to the time when they weren't as good. So then we looked for archiving in data for the internet, which leads us to Shodan. But then the second problem is, if we're using domains to identify Fangxiao sites, how do we find a raw IP which is within the Fangxiao infrastructure, but not tied to one of the domains? And the way we do that is by looking for commonalities between the entire campaign set. And the one thing that was common between everything was the thing that everyone forgets about is the fav icon at the top of the screen. If you take the hash of that fav icon, you run that through Shodan, we actually got a few raw IPs. If we went to port 80 on that IP, you saw campaigns being hosted, so we knew it was in their infrastructure. And then if you did a port scan, we revealed quad 8 was open. Going to quad 8 revealed this. This is an internal admin login panel. If your back-end infrastructure, which isn't meant to be seen by clients, is written in Mandarin, it could be indicative of where you're from. And that's kind of what we thought was it. And we were very happy with the report. We published it. We were lucky enough to give a talk at B-Sides London. And we thought that was kind of it. We were keeping a rough eye on it, but doing nothing major. And then a couple of weeks later, in rapid succession, things changed. First of all, that kind of the thing no one thinks about, the fav icon. Suddenly, now every new brand had its own unique fav icon, which stopped us from pivoting off it. Next, the Yuming.js file and the Google tags, which we mentioned earlier, which in the overly verbose code, that had been gone too. So replaced by this, which is a little bit harder to do. And lastly, we knew they were going to do this because we found some leaks, but they then implemented more support for things like Facebook Messenger, and that we know they're going to, we assume they're going to implement soon, some more ways to spread the campaign.
Cool. So, we thought we need to keep tracking them. We need to find some other ways to track them. And I don't know how many people here are infrastructure people or have ever deployed like a large-scale set of websites, but something you probably need to do that is a CDN. And Fangxiao really do use CDNs. They use them a lot. Unfortunately, they've gotten the key benefit of a CDN if you're a threat actor is blending in with the noise. It's, if everyone's like loading stuff from, I can't think of a CDN off the top of my head right now, but like a commonly used CDN, great. It just looks like any other idiot's web traffic. Unfortunately, Fangxiao used their own custom CDN domains. So some of them are very cleverly named. So you might be familiar with JSDeliver. It's a JavaScript CDN, and the official JSDeliver site is jsdeliver.net. So Fangxiao seem to control jsdeliver.cc, which doesn't really do much beyond serve a weird version of jQuery we haven't really been able to look into that much. Some of the CDNs are not particularly cleverly named. So you remember the advertising network, Advertica, which owns Yilix, has oo.oo, which I didn't even know .oo was a top-level domain until I saw this. Obviously, this isn't Fangxiao controlled, but from the datasets we had access to, this was a very strong indicator of Fangxiao stuff, and we could use this to filter down and then filter through that dataset. So a full list of all the CDNs that we've tracked can be seen here. The first dates we found them can be seen here as well. And yeah, so as Alana mentioned, we spoke about this stuff at B-Sides London, and then there were changes and stuff was removed. So I think this really comes down to an important thing to think about if you're doing threat intelligence, if you're doing investigations, if you're publishing, is that you have to assume the threat actor will read what you're talking about. You have to assume they will understand that you've effectively given them a free pen test, that you've gone in and you've told them all their vulnerabilities. And they will probably change things. So I know that everyone does, cool research and stuff, and they're like, I want to publish this. This is awesome. But you do have to be careful about, at what point is it diminishing returns? At what point are you just helping the criminals? And so we are continuing to track Fangxiao in other ways, but we're not going to talk about that now because there's no real benefit to it and we need to keep our visibility.
So let's wrap up with some key takeaways. First of all, they own over 42,000 different domains, and that is rapidly growing. That's actually quite an outdated number from besides London. It's much larger. Secondly, there's kind of evidence to suggest they're from China. Thirdly, they impersonate over 400 global brands. Something I've been working on for the last month or two is kind of tracking how quickly and when they add new brands. And it's something they do. That's kind of like their day job, is to research brands and like make new stuff, campaigns and things. And lastly, they've spent over $72,000 on domains alone. That isn't maintenance cost, that isn't wages, that isn't hosting cost, that is just domain cost. So if you think about that's one aspect of cost, what do you think their revenue is like? What do you think their profits are like? Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you would like to read the full report and you would like all the IOCs, you can go to that link or you can scan the fancy QR code. I have been Alana Witten.
And I have been Emily Dennison. Yeah, please do give the report a read because, we're very proud of it. And I guess we finished up with about 7 minutes to spare, give or take. So, questions? We've spoken to brands and stuff, but in general, stuff like Cloudflare or, good luck guessing anything from Cloudflare. It's a black box. They won't take down things like Kiwi Farms without massive community pressure. You're not going to get them to take down a phishing campaign, unfortunately. We've definitely thought about it, but not really a lot you can do. That's a good question. To be honest, no. I would really struggle to make a guess because, it depends how productive someone is. It depends, the work ethic, I guess. It depends how experienced they are. So that's not something I feel confident sort of speculating about. I don't know enough to be able to make that judgment. I don't know.
Yeah, it's something we've thought about for a long time, but at the end of the day, like we don't have any kind of. It would be so hard to make any sort of real judgment that it wouldn't be useful. Yeah.
Someone at the back. I think there's someone there in the back first. Oh, yeah. It's reasonably quick, to be honest. They register and it's up. They burn through domains quite quickly, especially with older domains. They're not up like 6 months or a year later. So if I had to speculate, I would guess they might be taking advantage of things like introductory offers or, to get cheap domains, but I can't say that for sure. But it's certainly not that they're buying all of these domains and then sitting on them for 5 years and then, using them. It's buying, go, etc.
Just building on that, we saw, because obviously we've tracked them over a long period of time, we did see the introductory offers thing at the beginning, but then they realized that as they've been around for a couple of years now, and they've realized that wasn't really like sustainable or profitable, which is why they moved to the top TLD, which we didn't really talk about, but that is the most used TLD. And to my knowledge, that's the cheapest you can buy a domain. It's $1.39 on Alibaba. So yeah, I think that reflects that kind of like how when they were first starting up, they had this idea, and then as they've grown and as they need to be sustainable in the long run, they've switched models to kind of keep costs low.
Also, it's worth pointing out that in terms of registrars, they mainly use like Chinese registers or like dodgy, no-name, cheap ones. There are a couple of questions, and I can't remember who was first. You, I think first, then I'll go. Yeah, well, I think Obviously, Cyjax does provide threat intelligence services, and we do provide like further stuff about Fangxiao that we're not publishing publicly. But in terms of, I think, this sort of methodology can be used for threat hunting for a bunch of stuff, not just Fangxiao. And if your blue team is mature enough to start working on like threat hunting stuff, that's always a good idea to start looking into. Yeah. There's someone over there, I think. Yes. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the end of that. That's a really good question. I honestly don't know.
For what it's worth, after the B-Sides London talk and after it went quite popular, we did see a few DNS protection services and providers did take the entire list and block it, which is, it's quite nice to see like your research has actually kind of made an impact, which is quite nice. Yeah.
I think one thing to point out is that because they churn through new domains and stuff so quickly, you can have, like, yeah. Actually, yeah, 2 more questions. That is something we've considered doing. It's just they have a very large word list, and honestly, we've been too busy to look into that yet.
When I say dictionary, I mean the English dictionary. It's not like a word list, it's the English dictionary. So you can just grep them and find anything you want. And secondly, I didn't mention it. I said that's the predominant schema. They do have other schemas. I think you saw a few on the data analytics slide. So there isn't like one hard thing they're set on. They will change it if they need it.
We've got time for probably 2 more questions, so I'll do you and then you. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. In terms of companies that regularly inform, we do inform some companies, and then, I think you're better placed to talk about informing companies because you've been working some stuff relating to that. And then in terms of getting to the media, this white paper did get to the media, but after that, a lot of the stuff that is continuing is more internal to Cyjax, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good sum up. I'm an analyst. I pass the domains on to someone else and they send them to the proper people. But I know they do get I think it's Synchold, registered for Synchold. Yeah. Everything from aviation to fast food to supermarkets. We're something in the works is potentially like a kind of a have I been pwned, but for brands that we're trying to work on. But yeah, everything. They're very kind of conscious and they read as much as they can. For example, a while ago there was like an unemployment crisis in Nigeria. The next day there was a campaign to do with that. For the World Cup, the next day there was World Cup. For COVID, there was COVID. It's just everything and anything.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's pretty much us done for time. So thank you very much. And any more questions, give us a shout.